There is a version of general aviation history where the Piper Comanche wins, where Piper's sleek, all-metal, retractable gear single becomes the benchmark cross-country airplane of the 1960s, the machine that serious pilots choose when they need speed, range, and something that does not feel like a compromise. That version of history almost happened. The Comanche was fast enough, capable enough, and refined enough to deserve it. And then, in the summer of 1972, it was gone. Not discontinued after a sales slump, not quietly retired after a redesign. Gone. The question of whether that disappearance was inevitable, or whether Piper simply chose not to fight for it, is one that general aviation pilots and historians have never quite settled. If you enjoy honest, analytical breakdowns of the aircraft that shaped general aviation, not the official story but the real one, subscribe. This channel exists because the machines worth understanding are rarely the ones with the cleanest press releases. To understand what the Comanche was built to do, you have to understand what Piper was in the mid-1950s. The company had made its name on simple, affordable airplanes, the Cub, the Tri-Pacer, and the family of fabric and tube designs that put flying within reach of ordinary Americans. That was Piper's identity, and it had served them well. But it was also a ceiling. By 1956, Beechcraft's Bonanza was already 8 years old, and it had become something more than an airplane. It was a statement, a signal that its owner had arrived. Piper had nothing in that conversation. The PA-24 Comanche, which first flew in 1956 and reached customers in 1958, was Piper's answer, a clean, all-metal, low-wing monoplane with retractable tricycle gear, a tapered wing, and enough performance to demand to be taken seriously by exactly the pilots who were choosing Wichita over Lock Haven. The Comanche's design was, for Piper, genuinely ambitious. The tapered wing, not the flat-bottom slab of later Cherokee derivatives, but a proper tapered planform with a more complex spar, gave the airframe efficiency that translated directly into cruise speed and range. The fuselage was roomy by the standards of the day, with a four-place cabin that owners described as genuinely comfortable rather than technically compliant. The gear retracted cleanly, the systems worked. The initial 180 horsepower variant was honest and capable, and the 250 horsepower version that followed into the market was the one that started serious conversations. And when Piper bolted a Lycoming IO720, an 8-cylinder 400 horsepower engine better suited to a small commuter aircraft, into the nose of the Comanche 400, the result was an airplane that could cruise at speeds that made a lot of retractable singles look slow. The 400 was not a subtle airplane. It was Piper's clearest statement that they were willing to build something extreme to prove a point. The point landed. The Comanche 250 and 260 became genuine favorites among the kind of pilot who flew long cross-country legs, under IFR, cared about true airspeed, and wanted useful load that did not disappear the moment you added fuel and 2 adults. The Comanche's range, practically 1,000 nautical miles in the 260 with careful power management, was not marketing fiction. Owners found that the airplane delivered close to what the numbers suggested, which in general, aviation was never something you could take for granted. The twin Comanche, introduced in 1963 as the PA-30, extended the family into the light twin market with an efficiency that established a reputation entirely its own. 2 engines, 320 horsepower combined, and cruise performance that embarrassed heavier twins, burning twice the fuel. The counter-rotating variant, the PA-39, addressed the P-factor asymmetry that the original PA-30 had lived with. Piper was iterating, the line was maturing, but the Comanche carried costs, not just operating costs, though those were real, but also manufacturing costs, and that distinction matters. The tapered wing that gave the Comanche its aerodynamic character was significantly more complex to build than the constant chord, flat-bottomed wing that Piper was simultaneously developing for the Cherokee line. The Cherokee, which arrived in 1960, was designed from the beginning with production efficiency as a core priority. Where the Comanche required skilled metalwork and tighter tolerances on its wing skins and ribs, the Cherokee could be built faster, cheaper, and with fewer skilled labor hours per airframe. That was not an accident. It was a deliberate manufacturing philosophy, and it created a tension inside Piper that would take a decade to fully resolve. The Comanche and the Cherokee were not just different airplanes. They represented 2 different answers to the question of what kind of company Piper wanted to be. The Comanche's weaknesses were real, and they deserved to be stated without apology. The tapered wing that provided its speed also produced stall characteristics that required more deliberate pilot technique than the Cherokee's forgiving flat wing. In slow-speed regimes, particularly during landing, the Comanche rewarded precision and punished inattention in ways that newer pilots sometimes found unforgiving. Insurance companies noticed. The 400 horsepower variant was in a different category entirely. Brutally fast, mechanically complex, expensive to overhaul, and powered by an engine that demanded respect from both the pilot and the mechanic. The twin Comanche's useful load was often criticized as inadequate for what owners expected from a twin. It was efficient, but the payload margins were tight enough to require planning on every flight. Parts availability, even by the 1970s, was becoming a legitimate ownership concern. These were not fatal flaws, but they accumulated. They were the texture of what it actually meant to own and operate a Comanche, as opposed to what the brochure suggested. The reputation the Comanche built over time is genuinely complicated. Among experienced pilots, particularly those who flew them cross-country in the 1960s, the Comanche occupies a position close to reverence. It is remembered as the airplane that flew like it meant it, that rewarded skill, that delivered genuine performance without asking you to accept major compromises in comfort or range. The Comanche community today remains fiercely loyal. The International Comanche Society maintains type support with an intensity that reflects how seriously owners take the airplane. And yet the Comanche also carries a peripheral reputation for demanding pilots who know what they are doing, a reputation that is not unfair, but that was perhaps amplified beyond what the accident data strictly justifies. The Comanche was not a dangerous airplane. It was a capable airplane with specific handling characteristics that required genuine competence. And in an era when general aviation was expanding rapidly and training standards were inconsistent, that distinction sometimes got lost. None of that, however, is what ended the Comanche. What ended the Comanche was a flood. In June 1972, Hurricane Agnes moved inland and delivered catastrophic rainfall to central Pennsylvania. The Susquehanna River crested well above flood stage and inundated Lock Haven, including Piper's manufacturing facility. The damage was severe. Tooling, fixtures, work-in-progress airframes, and the physical infrastructure required to build the Comanche line were destroyed or badly compromised. What happened next is the decision that general aviation historians still argue about. Piper chose not to rebuild the Comanche. The company had a choice. It could invest in restoring the complex tooling and specialized manufacturing infrastructure required to continue the type, or pivot entirely to the Cherokee-derived family that was already simpler, cheaper, and increasingly capable. They chose the Cherokee. The Arrow replaced the Comanche 260 in the retractable single market. The Lance, later the Saratoga, addressed the cabin class market. The Seneca took the twin Comanche's territory. All of them were Cherokee platform derivatives, and all of them were easier to build. The flood gave Piper the occasion, but the logic was already there. The manufacturing economics of the Cherokee platform had been winning the internal argument for years. The Comanche's complexity was real, and its tooling costs were real. The general aviation market in the early 1970s was shifting toward flying clubs, training operations, and cost-sensitive private owners who were choosing the simpler airplane over the faster one. The Comanche was not dying in the marketplace when the flood hit. Sales had declined, but the airplane was still competitive. What the flood did was accelerate a corporate conclusion that was already forming. That is what makes the Comanche's disappearance instructive, not as a story about flood damage, but as a story about what happens when a manufacturer has to choose between the airplane that represents its best engineering and the airplane that fits its business model. Piper chose the business. It was probably the right decision for Piper as a company. Whether it was the right decision for the pilots who wanted what the Comanche offered is a different question, and it does not have a clean answer. What the Comanche tells us is that capability alone does not guarantee survival in the general aviation market, and that the conditions under which an airplane disappears matter as much as the conditions under which it succeeds. The Comanche was not outcompeted. It was not obsolete. It was a manufacturing complexity that a flood made inconvenient to continue at precisely the moment when simpler alternatives were available. The Cherokee platform won not because it was the better airplane, but because it was the better product, and in a commercial context, those two things are not the same. Piper built its best Bonanza rival. Then it decided building it wasn't worth the trouble. Whether the Comanche deserved better is the question that has kept its owners arguing for 50 years. It probably did. Which classic piston aircraft should we break down next? The one that succeeded despite itself, or the one that failed despite being right? Let us know below, and if this kind of analysis is what you came here for, subscribe. There are more of these arguments waiting to be settled.